My boss looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're underperforming, Ethan. We need hungrier talent." I sat there, stunned, as he pushed the termination letter across the polished mahogany table. 20 years of loyalty, of missing birthdays and anniversaries, dismissed in a single breath. Daniel, the colleague I once called a brother, smirked from the corner, his silence louder than any insult. I shook Victor's hand, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out. But as I left the building, my hand tightened around the small USB in my pocket. Tomorrow, I promised myself, would be different. I walked out of Victor's office with the termination letter still burning in my hand, but the weight of the USB in my pocket steadied me. For 2 decades, I had been the man who showed up first and left last, the one who never said no to overtime, the one who missed soccer games, school recitals, and even my daughter's graduation, because the company needed me. They once called me the backbone of the firm, the man who kept the gears turning when everything threatened to collapse. I used to wear that label like a badge of honor. Now it felt like chains. That night, the house was dark when I came home. My wife, Sarah, sat at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't even look up at first. When she finally did, her eyes carried a disappointment I had grown too familiar with. "They let you go?" she asked, though she already knew. I nodded, avoiding her gaze. Behind her, a framed photo of our daughter in her cap and gown stared back at me. I had promised I would be there that day. Instead, I was in the office, finalizing a pitch that Daniel would later present as his own. "Was it worth it, Ethan?" Sarah whispered. I had no answer. Do you know what it feels like to give everything to something, only to realize it was never yours to begin with? Have you ever traded memories for deadlines, believing loyalty would eventually be repaid? Sometimes I wonder if the bigger betrayal was theirs, or mine, for betraying my own family in the name of duty. The following morning, I returned to the office, not as an employee, but as a ghost haunting the place I once called home. Colleagues avoided eye contact, as if my misfortune was contagious. Daniel was already in the conference room, smiling, presenting slides that were unmistakably mine. Charts I had spent months refining glowed on the screen while he basked in the applause. I stood in the doorway, long enough for him to notice me. His smile faltered, only for a second, before he straightened his tie and carried on. That was my first glimpse of the cracks in our friendship. Back at my desk, which I had yet to clear, I opened a folder of financial reports. Something didn't add up. A series of numbers had been adjusted in a way that shifted millions from one department to another. When I pointed this out weeks earlier, Victor had brushed it off. "Don't worry about it, Ethan. Focus on performance, not paperwork." I remembered his tone, firm but oddly nervous. At the time, I convinced myself it wasn't my place to question. Now, staring at the false figures, I realized why they wanted me silent. My signature, perfectly forged, appeared at the bottom of the document. I leaned back in my chair, the walls of the office suddenly pressing in. My own name had been weaponized against me. If I exposed this, I could burn the whole place down. But if I stayed quiet, they would bury me and move on. I folded the paper slowly, slipping it into my briefcase. A storm was coming, and I was done pretending not to hear the thunder. That evening, Sarah tried again. "Don't they see everything you've done?" Her voice trembled between anger and heartbreak. I wanted to tell her about the forged numbers, the stolen ideas, the lies, but instead, I stared at my hands. She mistook my silence for resignation. In truth, it was calculation. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is wait. Later that night, as I walked past Daniel's office, I caught him speaking on the phone. His door was ajar just enough for his words to slip out. "Yes, Victor. Everything's on track. He won't be a problem anymore." My chest tightened. My best friend, the man who had once stood as my best man at my wedding, was now plotting my erasure with the very people I had bled for. I could have stormed in, confronted him, demanded answers. But confrontation was exactly what they expected. Instead, I walked away, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Losing a job was one thing. Losing a brother was another. That was the night loyalty died in me. Do you ever wonder how many smiles hide knives behind them? How many handshakes are rehearsals for betrayal? In that moment, I realized Daniel had been rehearsing for years. I went to bed with a heaviness I hadn't felt in decades. Sarah was asleep, her breathing steady, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. An email, no sender. The subject line read only, "Tomorrow, you'll understand." I sat up, heart pounding. The message contained no text, just an attachment, a document labeled proof PDF. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the glow of the screen, knowing that whatever was inside would either save me or destroy me. The clock ticked past 1, past 2. My eyes burned, my mind racing. Tomorrow, the message promised. Tomorrow. The following week, I returned to the building under the pretense of collecting my belongings. I expected to be invisible, a discarded man quietly packing his things. But whispers followed me through the halls. Eyes darted away as if I were a ghost. In the conference room, a presentation was in progress. I paused at the door long enough to see the new project proposal on the screen, a project I had laid the foundation for months ago. Except now, my name was nowhere. The slide credited Daniel and a team I had never even worked with. When I asked a junior manager about it, he shifted uncomfortably. "It was Victor's order," he whispered, "but I think it came from higher up. They wanted new blood on the project." His eyes flicked nervously toward the executive floor. That was when I understood. Victor was not the hand, but the knife. Someone else had guided it. That night, I sat at the dinner table with my daughter Lily. She was 12, sharp-eyed, too observant for her own good. "Dad," she said softly, "why don't they believe you? You always told me if you work hard and be honest, people will see it." Her words sliced deeper than Victor's insults ever could. I forced a smile, hiding the truth that honesty in business was currency no one wanted to trade. Have you ever asked yourself, in the corporate world, is loyalty anything more than a line on a balance sheet? Do they weigh integrity, or do they only count profit margins? Sometimes I think the company measured my worth not in decades of service, but in quarterly numbers. Later, while cleaning out my old desk, I stumbled across a thick folder labeled Restructuring Plan. My curiosity betrayed me. Flipping through, I froze at the sight of my name printed clearly under Phase 1, Removal. My pulse quickened. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. They had a list, a sequence of disposable lives. I was only the beginning. The anger that had been simmering inside me ignited. If they thought I would disappear quietly, they were mistaken. I took my laptop home that night and began the slow, meticulous process of copying files, spreadsheets, emails, confidential memos. I archived everything. Somewhere in those gigabytes lay the truth, a thread I could pull until the whole facade unraveled. It was around midnight when a voice startled me. "You're not the only one who's seen things." I turned to find Maya, a timid administrative assistant who rarely spoke above a whisper. She stood in the doorway of my half-cleared office, clutching a stack of folders to her chest. "I've noticed irregularities. I want to help." Her courage surprised me. She was young, low-level, seemingly powerless. Yet here she was, offering a hand when everyone else recoiled. I nodded, unsure whether to trust her. Allies could be traps. Still, something in her eyes, fear mixed with resolve, reminded me of myself years ago. The next morning, a call from the hospital shattered my fragile focus. My mother had collapsed. At her bedside, machines beeped steadily, mocking me with every pulse. The doctor explained she needed a procedure, costly and urgent. I stared at the bill, numbers blurring. My bank account could not carry this weight. The temptation gnawed at me. I had enough evidence to sink the company, and rivals would pay handsomely for such information. A single transfer, and my mother's care would be secured. But what would that make me? A man fighting corruption by becoming corrupt himself? Or just another pawn, trading morality for survival? The dilemma chewed at me until my teeth hurt from grinding. By the time I returned home, exhaustion hollowed me out. On my desk lay a single sheet of paper, centered perfectly, though I hadn't placed it there. My skin prickled as I read the words scrawled in sharp ink. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stared at the note until the edges blurred. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. They were watching me, which meant I was closer than they wanted. I slipped the paper into my drawer, sat down, and opened my laptop. If they thought a warning would silence me, they had forgotten who I used to be. The summons came on a Tuesday morning. A terse email from Human Resources instructed me to attend a disciplinary hearing at noon. No explanation, no agenda, just a cold line of text that felt like a guillotine blade suspended above my neck. I arrived to find the conference room already filled. Victor sat at the head of the table, flanked by two executives from the board. Their faces were masks of authority, eyes sharp, mouths pursed as if they had already rendered judgment. "Ethan Cole," Victor began, his voice smooth but sharp. "You are under investigation for financial misconduct, specifically falsifying revenue reports and authorizing illegal transfers." A folder slid across the table toward me. Inside were copies of the doctored reports, each stamped with my forged signature. I lifted my eyes slowly, scanning the room. And then I saw him, Daniel, my friend, my brother in arms for 20 years. He stood from his chair, cleared his throat, and said the words that cut deeper than any blade. "I can confirm Ethan signed off on those documents. I warned him it was reckless, but he insisted." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to stand, to shout, to rip the lies apart. But instead, my daughter's face flashed before me, her wide, trusting eyes, when I told her, "Ba will always do the right thing." The weight of that promise pressed down harder than the accusations. If you were in my place, accused of crimes you didn't commit, betrayed by the man you trusted most, would you fight back with fury or let silence speak for you? Is dignity found in defiance or in restraint? I let the silence stretch, a storm contained behind my ribs. Victor leaned forward, mistaking my quiet for surrender. His leather briefcase lay open by his side, and in its depths I glimpsed a familiar shape, an external hard drive. My lips twitched upward. They thought they had buried every secret, but the evidence sat right there, within arm's reach. The hearing adjourned with promises of further review. I walked out without a word, but inside me, something had shifted. That night, at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and entered a string of commands only I knew. Lines of code bloomed across the screen as I accessed the back door I had installed months ago, a hidden key into the company's nervous system. The servers responded like obedient soldiers, yielding emails, contracts, hidden ledgers. I saw the breadth of the rot. Shell companies siphoning funds, offshore accounts, bribes masked as consulting fees. Victor's name appeared again and again, but so did others. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Buried deep within the logs was a file labeled Compliance, Daniel. My chest tightened as I opened it. Screenshots of personal messages, compromising photos, threats. Victor hadn't merely recruited Daniel. He had blackmailed him. My so-called betrayer wasn't acting out of ambition, but survival. His silence at the hearing had been bought with fear. I leaned back, conflicted. Rage urged me to expose them all, to drag every name into the light. But I couldn't ignore the collateral damage. Some employees were pawns, trapped like Daniel. They didn't deserve to burn with the guilty. I spent hours combing through the files, carefully redacting names, shielding those who had no choice in the conspiracy. By dawn, I had crafted a package of evidence airtight enough to crush the company's facade. With a single click, I encrypted the files and sent them to 3 places at once: a trusted journalist, a regulatory agency, and a rival corporation eager for blood. When Sarah awoke, she found me in the living room, pale and exhausted. I pulled her close, holding her as if I could anchor myself against the storm I had unleashed. "The game has only just begun," I whispered into her hair. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't need to. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A new message appeared, anonymous, the words stark and cold. "You just made enemies bigger than you think." I stared at the glowing screen long after Lily drifted to sleep, a chill running through me. I had set the first domino in motion, but the shadows behind Victor were deeper, wider, more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The first headlines broke on a Thursday morning. Tech giant under fire for fraudulent practices. By noon, the story had spread across every major outlet. Screens on trading floors flashed red as the company's stock plummeted, wiping billions in market value within hours. Executives scrambled, issuing hollow statements about compliance reviews and internal audits. But the damage was irreversible. Investors fled like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I watched it unfold from my living room, the television casting blue light across my face. Sarah stood behind me, arms folded, silent. She didn't ask if I had anything to do with it. She didn't need to. Her silence was not suspicion. It was resignation. She knew the storm came from my hands. But the twist came quickly. Just as journalists dissected the files I had released, another wave of evidence appeared. Documents, voice recordings, photographs. They weren't from me. Someone else inside had chosen that moment to bleed the company dry. For a moment, I was stunned. Who else was fighting from within? And why now? Sometimes the truth doesn't come from the strongest voices, but from those who have been silenced the longest. Perhaps it was a junior staffer, a secretary, a number cruncher, tired of being invisible. Whoever it was, their contribution accelerated the collapse. The story grew teeth sharper than I had ever imagined. By the end of the week, the board called an emergency meeting. Shareholders demanded resignations, and the company's name was synonymous with corruption. My phone buzzed constantly with reporters begging for comment. I ignored them all. Watching the empire crumble was satisfaction enough. Yet satisfaction never lasts. That night, as I closed the blinds, I noticed movement outside. A figure lingered across the street, unmoving, too still to be casual. My heart quickened. They knew where I lived. I stood there in the dark, watching the watcher, until finally the shadow melted into the night. But the unease remained. The next days brought escalation. Federal investigators announced formal inquiries. Offices were raided, documents seized, emails subpoenaed. On television, I saw Victor, pale and sweating, ducking away from microphones as agents escorted him into a car. The once unshakable executive looked small, brittle, cornered. But then the deeper twist revealed itself. Through leaked testimony, it became clear Victor was not the architect. He was a blade, sharp but wielded by another hand. A larger, older network of power had pulled the strings. Hidden investors, shell organizations, faceless figures whose names were whispered but never spoken aloud. The fraud was not Victor's empire. It was theirs. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt dwarfed. My enemy was no longer a company, but a hydra with endless heads. Meanwhile, the company rotted from within. Employees resigned in droves. Departments shut down. Projects abandoned. Once bustling offices stood half empty. Cubicles like tombstones of careers that would never recover. Clients tore up contracts. Lawsuits mounted, and suppliers demanded cash payments the company could not provide. One afternoon, while walking through the city, I spotted an old colleague. His eyes flickered with recognition before dropping to the pavement. He crossed the street without a word. Shame had hollowed him, or perhaps fear. It struck me then. Victims and villains often wore the same suits, drank the same coffee, sat in the same meetings. Survival blurred the lines. Do you know that feeling when triumph curdles into loneliness? I had brought them down, but now I wandered through the ruins alone. That night, as the city settled into silence, a knock shattered the calm. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through the house. Sarah stiffened beside me. I opened the door to find Victor himself, disheveled, eyes bloodshot, sweat dripping from his brow. "We need to talk," he rasped. Victor stood in my doorway, shoulders slumped. The arrogance I once despised, now replaced with something closer to desperation. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled and damp with sweat. For a moment, I simply stared, weighing whether to slam the door or let him speak. Sarah's eyes darted between us, wide with alarm. Lily, awakened by the pounding knock, peeked from the hallway before scurrying back to her room. "I'm not your enemy, Ethan," Victor said, his voice breaking. "Not really. They forced me. I was a puppet. You think I built all this? I didn't. I was a tool, just like you." I laughed bitterly. "You ruined me. You let Daniel betray me. You signed the papers with my name? That wasn't a tool's choice. That was yours." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hoarse whisper. If you think this ends with me, you're a fool. There are people above me, people who make men like us disappear. If you keep pushing, they'll come for you. They'll come for your family. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement upstairs. Lily, huddled near the railing, listening, her small face pale with fear. My heart twisted. She shouldn't hear this, shouldn't carry the weight of her father's war. Victor fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it onto the table. Proof, records, photos, everything. I'm done covering for them. I need your help, and you need mine. For a long moment, I didn't touch it. Every instinct screamed not to trust him. Yet curiosity clawed at me. Slowly, I opened the envelope. The first photograph froze my blood. A boardroom table, faces I recognized, executives not just from my company, but from others. Men whose names carried weight across entire industries. They weren't competitors. They were co-conspirators, carving up markets in shadows, deciding who rose and who fell. I closed the folder quickly, my pulse hammering. Lily's footsteps retreated upstairs. Sarah clutched her robe tight, whispering, "What have you gotten us into, Ethan?" Victor leaned in, eyes hollow. "You think you've exposed corruption? You've only peeled the first layer. Help me, and maybe we survive. Refuse, and we both vanish." Have you ever stared into the eyes of the man who destroyed you and wondered if your survival depended on shaking his hand? Would you take it, knowing every instinct told you to crush it instead? I said nothing. The silence stretched, suffocating. Finally, Victor rose and staggered toward the door. "Decide quickly," he muttered. "They won't wait." Hours later, when the house had gone still, I returned to the envelope. With trembling hands, I flipped through page after page. Each document bared another layer of the rot. Illegal offshore accounts, falsified mergers, bribery trails that stretched beyond borders. And then I reached the photograph that made me gasp aloud. The man at the head of the shadowy table was someone I never expected. A government official, smiling, his hand raised in a toast. The walls seemed to close in. The enemy wasn't just corporate, it was systemic. The next day, I began reaching out discreetly, searching for allies. I discovered them one by one. Disgraced managers, whistleblowers who had vanished, employees blacklisted for speaking out. A hidden network already existed, fragmented but breathing. They weren't gone. They were waiting. One email led to another, and soon I was part of encrypted threads. Messages filled with rage, sorrow, and determination. "We've been waiting for someone to push the first domino," one wrote. "Now we're ready." The deeper twist came when I recognized some of the names. High-level executives, people still in power, were secretly feeding us information. They weren't all villains. Some had endured threats. Others played along to survive. But in quiet corners, they were fighting back. Days blurred into nights as I sifted through the files. Between hospital visits to see my mother, frail, whispering encouragement through oxygen tubes, I pieced together the map of the conspiracy. "You've done what your father never dared," she murmured once, her thin fingers clutching mine. "Don't stop now." Her words cut deep. My father had spent his life in factories, always bowing his head, always swallowing injustice. I had sworn not to be like him. But was I braver? Or just reckless enough to drag my family into danger? If you were me, would you chase justice for all, even if it meant putting your family in the crosshairs? Or would you bury the truth to keep them safe? Late one evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope spread before me. My phone buzzed with encrypted messages, allies urging me to release everything, others begging caution. My hands hovered above the keyboard. Expose it all, and I risked painting a target on my family's backs. Hold back, and I betrayed every victim still suffering in silence. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for me to choose which world tomorrow would wake to. Weeks passed in a blur of headlines and investigations. The company that once boasted billions in revenue was now a cautionary tale, its offices raided, its reputation shattered beyond repair. For the first time in decades, I felt the air in my lungs was truly mine, yet freedom was not without weight. What do you do after tearing down the walls of the prison you once helped build? The answer came unexpectedly. A startup, small but ambitious, reached out to me. They were different. Transparent contracts, democratic leadership, voices heard at every level. At first, I doubted them. Promises of honesty are easy to make and easier to break. But when I walked into their office, I recognized faces. Men and women who had once been casualties of the same system I had fought. They had rebuilt from the ashes, and now they invited me to stand among them. The twist was almost poetic. The company offering me redemption had been created by victims just like me, people who knew the sting of betrayal, who had sworn never to repeat the sins of the past. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to redefine what work could mean. For the first time in years, I woke before dawn not from anxiety, but from anticipation. That morning, I drove Lily to school. She sat in the passenger seat, her backpack spilling with books, her chatter filling the car. We laughed at traffic lights, shared stories, and when I walked her to the gates, she turned and grinned. "You're actually on time, Dad." Her words carried more pride than any award I had ever received. In my new role, I became more than an employee. I became a mentor, an advocate for fairness. I helped draft policies that shielded workers from the very traps I had once endured. At conferences, I spoke not about profits, but about people. Business without integrity, I told the crowd, is rot dressed in a suit. To my surprise, they listened. Some even applauded. Yet peace is fragile. One evening, as I closed my laptop, an email appeared. No sender, no subject, just a single line. "It's not over. They're watching." My stomach nodded. The shadows I had fought hadn't vanished. They had only retreated. Still, life pressed forward. The old company collapsed fully. Its name stripped from buildings, its executives scattered. Victor disappeared from the financial world entirely, like a ghost erased from the ledger. Some said he fled abroad. Others whispered darker fates. I didn't search for him. Whatever end he met, it was one he had carved himself. But I couldn't ignore the final revelation. As I pieced together lingering threads, I realized the conspiracy I had exposed was only a fragment. The rot stretched wider, crossing industries, even nations. What I had thought of as a victory was merely the first battle in a war far larger than me. On Lily's 13th birthday, I stood in the backyard, watching her blow out candles. For once, I was there from the beginning to the end, not a ghost arriving late with excuses. Her laughter rang out, pure and unburdened, and Sarah's eyes softened as they met mine. For a brief, fragile moment, life was whole again. Sometimes I wonder, is revenge ever enough? Or is it only the doorway to something greater? I realized then that my fight had never truly been about vengeance. It was about change. about making sure no one else had to endure the silence I'd carried for so long. "Dad, make a wish," Lily urged, handing me the last piece of cake. I smiled, my chest heavy with both pride and sorrow. My wish wasn't for myself. It was for her, to grow up in a world where truth mattered more than profit. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she curled into the blankets, eyes fluttering shut. I bent close, my voice barely above a whisper. "I kept my promise," I said. "No matter what comes next, remember that." And in the quiet of that room, with my daughter safe and sleeping, I understood the final lesson. Sometimes, revenge is not the ending of a story, but the beginning of a greater change.